Today on The Nation Speaks, war correspondent Hollie McKay made it out of Afghanistan under Taliban escort. She joins us from Uzbekistan with her incredible story and so much more. In America Q&A, we ask, given what we know now, do you think America was right to leave Afghanistan? Finally, to switch gears entirely, we ask people across the country if they believe the government can monitor everything they do on their smartphones. Hello and welcome to The Nation Speaks. I'm your host, Cindy Drucker. For the next little while, The Nation Speaks has a new format. We will be a 30-minute show, same time, same place, just a little shorter. I hope that's not too disappointing. Today, the focus remains on the tense situation in Afghanistan. August 31st, Tuesday, is the deadline for America to complete its evacuation mission. After that, anything could happen next, truly anything. In the United States, pressure is on the White House to extend that deadline, or thousands of Americans and Afghan allies will be abandoned behind enemy lines. Meanwhile, the Taliban has promised unnamed consequences if troop withdrawal isn't complete. It's hard not to see this as a lose-lose calculation. Then beyond that, what does life look like for regular Afghans after an entire generation of relative freedom? Many are terrified, particularly women and girls. The Taliban is calling the fear unfounded hysteria and promises not to be the brutal regime it was 20 years ago. It also says it wants good international and diplomatic economic relations, including with the United States. We don't have a crystal ball, of course, but we do have someone who has a very good read on the region. With us now from Uzbekistan is Hollie McKay, who recently made it out of Afghanistan. Hollie, you've worked on the front line in war zones and humanitarian crises, not only in Afghanistan, but all over that region: Iraq, Pakistan, Syria, Iran, Turkey, Yemen, Saudi Arabia, also Burma, Russia, East Africa. So thank you so much for joining us today. I know there's a lot going on for you.
Yeah, it's been a crazy whirlwind, that's for sure. A lot different to how I was initially anticipating this Afghanistan trip to be.
I can only imagine. I'm very, very grateful that you're safe. I just don't even know what it must be like to have been living through what you've been through. I can imagine, and you know, everyone around you, a lot of panic, chaos, fear, and so much uncertainty. You were in the north, and Mazar, quite far from Kabul. So very fortunately, you made it out of Afghanistan into Uzbekistan just a few days ago. Can you tell us what happened over those last few days and how you got out?
Absolutely. So basically, my photographer, Jake Simkin, and I working in Kabul, we really thought we would be in the region for several months, covering, I guess, that last chapter of when the U.S. left and how the government was going to stand on its 2 feet. But the story turned out to be very different. We went north to Mazar, where there was a lot of action because a lot of the northern provinces at that point were falling fairly fast. We really thought Mazar was such a strong anti-Taliban place that it didn't seem like it was going to be falling anytime soon. And we were out in the markets doing interviews, and the streets were really quite alive despite the situation. And it just deteriorated so rapidly. It's sort of 1 minute everybody was out and things were just wonderful. The next minute you just started to feel like something was very, very wrong. And you saw people lining up around the banks trying to get money out, and just this spidey sense that we both had. And as we were kind of running back to our hotel just because things felt so off and so quiet, that's when the Taliban were able to come in on motorcycles and really take the city without a shot. And the speed of it was quite dizzying, and there was no way we could have gotten out before that. So it was just a very uncertain time at that point. We were a little unsure really what to expect. Were foreigners going to be targeted? Were journalists going to be targeted? It just wasn't clear completely in the beginning, and it was a very uncertain time because there were no other foreigners around, and the airport had been closed, and we weren't sure, any road we would have taken would have entailed going through multiple Taliban checkpoints. So in the end, really the only viable option was taking the risk in having the Taliban physically escort us and obtaining the permissions from the Uzbek consulate in Mazar and going with the Taliban through those checkpoints through to the north. That just seemed the only logical way out of the city at that point. And in my situation, it was obviously a risk with a reward that the Taliban were trying to be very welcoming to me at the time, and sort of trying to say that they weren't the Taliban that existed 20 years ago. So it was a very interesting experience, to say the least. And I, tried to get the best understanding I could in that period of time of what it is that they were trying to project, and really who they were. And so it was a very interesting experience, to say the least. And I'm curious to see really what's going to happen once the United States does leave and flies that final plane out. And will this Taliban be any different to what it was 20 years ago?
That's certainly the question on everyone's mind. I'm absolutely certain everyone who's in Afghanistan and has no way out. So let me ask you, I know I read one of your pieces about a friend who is a women's rights activist. She's determined to stay there. Have you talked to her again recently? Is this still her plan? What kind of space do you think there is for someone like her? And just to, sort of outline things, for a whole generation, women have been able to go to school, become doctors, lawyers, and of course the fear that that's all going to get shut down again.
Absolutely, and it's a very genuine fear. And someone like Faria, I've known for many years, and she's been such a force of nature and really just fighting for women all across the country. And it's... Afghanistan has been, especially in the rural areas, the levels of domestic violence are just extremely high, and she's been that person championing for prosecutions to happen for women, even those that have been murdered, to make sure that these people are not able to just get away and the impunity exists. So she's been wonderful, and she's absolutely heartbroken and really rightfully angry about what's happened. And she feels very much like the entire international community, and not just the United States, but the United Nations and Europe and everyone else that sort of championed the work she's done, has basically left her to the wolves. And so she's been pretty much, aside from protesting a little bit in the street, really hiding out. She's trying to really just put together in her mind what the next chapter of her fight looks like. But she's very determined that she doesn't want to leave, and she needs to be there to continue this fight. And I mean, God bless her, that what she's going to face is certainly going to be an uphill battle. But I don't think she's alone. I think that over the years that so many Afghan women who have become so accustomed to being able to live the lives that they want to live, and to be the people they want to be, and to get the educations that they want to get, and they fought so hard for that, they are not willing to just let that go in the blink of an eye, and they're really willing to put their lives on the line. And to me, that's just absolutely extraordinary.
I was going to ask about that, if there's, networks of women that she's with that are also, as determined as she is at this point.
Absolutely. There are many. And I know in her case, she has 3 other sisters, and they're all very much as committed to the women's rights as she is. And so they have quite a contingency across the Kabul and in some of the other cities. It's a little bit more difficult in rural areas. I think they're a lot more closed and conservative, but certainly in the cities, there's just been a huge push in cinema and music and art, and life has really opened up. And I think the situation for women and the situation for media have been 2 of the sort of slim success stories out of the 20-year war. Whether you agreed with the war or you didn't, they're 2 things that have come out of it that have been quite extraordinary in terms of the freedoms that have been issued. And the people that have fought for that, they're just not willing to walk away from it. And I think that, we need to get behind that as much as we can in supporting them to stay. Mind you, most people have opted to leave. Most of the activists that I've come to know over the years in different capacities aren't willing to take that risk to wait around, because they know that that could potentially be quite fatal. So people have really flocked and done their best to try to get out of the country. But for those that are staying, I just think it's an absolutely remarkable fight that they're willing to face the Taliban, and they're not going to let these rights just go by the wayside.
So what was your sense of people's thoughts about the pending withdrawal of U.S. troops, even before anything started to happen?
I think people felt very abandoned by it. I think that even though at the time the U.S. really, by the end of it, it had 2,500 troops, which of course is not a lot, considering in the past there's been upwards of 100,000 during the surge. So it was such a small contingency, but I tend to use this analogy. It's almost like putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. Afghanistan has been in a state of conflict for many, many decades. And whilst I don't think the US presence obviously didn't stop that and didn't look like it was able to stop that anytime soon, what that small contingency did was kind of just hold it together enough for the people to continue their lives and enough to keep some of the other sort of enemy elements at bay, if you will, that they knew that the US was there and that it had the assets, the air power, the ability to mobilize things and escalate the conflict if it needed to happen. Whereas when you take that security blanket away, that really enables this power vacuum to come in, and suddenly you do see things fall as fast as they did. And that's been a really difficult pill for the Afghan people to swallow. And I also think, I don't know that people really expected their own government to crumble as quickly as they did. I think a lot of people expected that it probably would inevitably happen, maybe in 6 months, maybe in a year. But I don't think anybody could have expected it to happen whilst the US was still even there. And that was the shocking part of all of it, is that they felt abandoned by the US and then felt sold out by their own country. I mean, as you can see, that the President Ghani had fled the country and basically handed it over to the Taliban, where they didn't even have to sort of sit down and make a proper peace exchange with him. They were able to just walk into the palace and immediately take it over.